Kamakani Kaili Aloha. Aloha Hawaii, this is Pokalai Nui and you are listening to Hawaiian Potpourri. Welcome to the program, or welcome back to the program. In the earlier hour, we had been talking about international issues, taking a look at the non-aligned nations and an introduction to what that is all about, taking a look at Iran and also at Israel, at the whole concept of national defense and how defensive strategy is built and the manipulation by governments to the various strategies that are being used, oftentimes using rhetoric to mask the reality, calling it a defensive posture while actually the posture might be heavily offensive. We talked about propaganda and the use and abuse of propaganda, and most currently maybe a smaller part of it, but the use of propaganda to suggest that our football team now is saying that I'm so happy that they dedicated their lives for me. I felt like they died for me, which is a bunch of crap. When they talk about people at Pearl Harbor who were killed, they didn't die for anyone. They died as a matter of circumstance, and the circumstance was the failure to achieve peace among the leaders in the United States as well as the leaders in Japan. So rather than looking at it from that side, they try to personalize it and make the substitute warriors, they actually named the warriors, but a football team, a game to participate in the carrying on of the propaganda. Propaganda galore. We also have been exposed to propaganda by Israel, by the United States with regards to Iran, and then the whole question of Syria and the kind of news media that we are getting with regards to Syria and how it is influenced and affected by the propaganda machines that come out of Washington as well as out of Israel. Our telephone number here is 524-1080. If you give me a call, we'll give you some time on the radio and we can conduct a discussion on these matters. Well, let's go to our next caller. Aloha caller, welcome to the program.
Good afternoon, Poker.
Yes, hi.
I wanted to respond to your statements about the question of how can the United States and Israel dare really to say you can't have this or you can't have that to other countries while they're doing the very same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Now that generates the idea under which I grew up from the way my family structure was, and that is, do not do as I do, do as I say. And that's part of that way of thinking that comes from a militarized paternal family structure. The leader is free to do anything, and that's what we see among these people who are disregarding laws that we all otherwise live under. And so one can see the manifestation of that idea. Well, the lines seem pretty clear. I can hear your pretty well.
Oh, you can?
Yes.
Yeah, let me see what has changed. Nothing has changed.
Well,
I'm glad to hear that it's clear. Go ahead. What was that?
Yes, what we're not getting is the feedback because of the radio being open.
Okay, that's what you're. That's a sensation.
Yeah, and so I can hear you quite well. And we don't have that feedback that we usually get when I leave the radio open and try to talk. Isn't that true?
Well, I'm glad. I'm so happy
yeah,
that...
me too. This is much better. We can say it out. That's great. Well, all right. I just wanted to express that
Yes.
that idea is alive and well.
Do as I tell you to do, but not as I do.
No, do not do as I do. Do as I say.
Yes.
Yes, that's what it amounts to. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for calling.
Bye.
And hooray, it's a celebration. This listener has had such a difficult time over months not able to hear me, and so I had to turn her radio on. And is it a miracle, or somebody decided to cut the interference with my telephone lines? Okay, well, anyway, let's see, if you would like to call and have an opinion on these matters, give me a call. The lines are open, and I'll entertain your telephone call. Now, what about this place called Syria? You know, when you're dealing with these places across the world, places that we are unfamiliar with, we tend to get sort of dumbed down because it's now become just another name with a foreign culture that we really don't understand and don't understand the background behind it. But if you listen carefully, you don't need to be an expert on every part of the world, but listen carefully to the language that is being used. So now you have a group who are not called insurgents, but who are called the opposition, who are fighting against the established, recognized government, and that is the government of Syria. And in this case, because the United States is not friendly to the government of Syria and are in support of this insurgency or this terrorism group or this group that is against the government, the language that is being used to describe those in opposition to Assad or opposition to the government changes. So that as previously when we heard about these events and these bombings of areas in shopping centers and the rest, the general term that was being used was the term terrorist. And now when it is the people of Syria using the same techniques to attack United Nations officials, other visitors to Syria, as well as Syrian soldiers, they are not using, or that use of the term terrorist is not being applied to them. And I guess there's a second reason why. It's not only what side does the United States cheer for in this particular instance, but what side is the United States sending money to? If the situation is, as is said by the Red Cross to be, that what you essentially have in Syria at the present time is a civil war, it has elevated itself to such an extent that the rebels are now sufficiently armed and engaged that they can be considered to be in a civil war with the central government, very similar to the civil war in the United States in the 1860s, the North and the South. Okay. And therefore, the Red Cross has called for the application of the principles of a civil war and applying the body of law dealing with civil war, the body of international law dealing with civil war, which says that when a country is in a civil war, when they're fighting North and South or East and West or pro-government rebels or rebellions to the government, other nations are supposed to step out, step aside, leave the controversy and allow that country to resolve its own affairs. In this case, the United States is not doing that. They are sending in supplies, they are sending in their CIA agents and others to support the overthrow of a legitimate government. Very contradictory to the United States policy that while you can talk about the overthrow of a government, overthrowing a government should be done and can be done if it is done peacefully and through the ballot box or some other peaceful form. And they reserve that for the United States. So you have no right taking up arms against the government. Any change in the government form must be through the ballot box. But when the Syrian president announces, okay, I'll hold elections, but the rebels are continually fighting, the United States is not supporting a resort to the ballot box. They are bringing in tons of arms, and they are working with Saudi Arabia and other countries, including Turkey, to contribute armaments into the rebel camps. And at the same time, they are attacking, the United States is attacking the Syrian government. I'm not saying that the Syrian government is correct or the rebels are correct. I am saying that the conduct of external forces should be consistent. If it is not consistent, there is no such thing, then there is no such thing as law. There is no such thing as principles by which people are to conduct themselves in various circumstances. And so if there is no such thing, then you leave it to the whim of whatever party wants to do whatever they want. In other words, you remove all law and people can do whatever they want. And I don't think this is the way we should allow or we should permit international relations to be conducted. Okay, our telephone number here is 524-1080. If you would like to call and share an opinion, I'll take your call and give you an opportunity to share that opinion. Moving on again in the international arena, you recall the name Julian Assange. Along with that is, what was that, Sergeant, what was his first name? Manning is the last name. Brad, was it Brad Manning? Well, anyway, this article comes out of New York, and it's dated the 17th day of August. So this was just yesterday. And it says 2 months after he sought refuge in Ecuador's London embassy, WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange was formally granted asylum by Quito on Thursday. But with Sweden and the United States pursuing him for potential criminal charges, Assange is unlikely to make his way out of the UK, which has threatened to break in to the embassy to arrest him. Assange has been avoiding extradition to Sweden for months, where he is to be questioned over sex assault claims, a mere, quote, attempt to get him into a jurisdiction which will then make it easier to extradite him to the U.S., he told The Sun in December. The Sun is a news organization and not his biological kid. Okay. The Ecuadorian government said that the decision was taken after the UK, Sweden, and the US refused to guarantee that once extradited to Sweden, Assange would not be sent to Washington to face additional charges. The three countries, quote, would not provide any guarantees that he would not be sent to the US to be tried for political crimes. Mark Weisbrot of the Center for Economic and Policy Research told IPS. So, Ecuador had no choice under international law but to grant him asylum, Weisbrot said. We believe Assange's fears are legitimate and that he could face political persecution if the measures are not taken, Ricardo Patino, Ecuador's Minister of Foreign Affairs, said Thursday at a press conference in Quito. The famous hacker, once called a high-tech terrorist by the Barack Obama administration, fears that he would then face other charges for having leaked top-secret information, including 400,000 documents about the Iraq War and the U.S. torture of detainees. He has thus far found refuge in the premises of the Ecuadorian embassy in London, where he has been sleeping on an air mattress since June. If he sets foot outside of the building, he will be arrested by the British police, sent to Sweden, and possibly the United States. Thursday, applause from many of Assange's supporters could be heard outside of the embassy as news came that Ecuador had granted diplomatic asylum to their Australian refugee. I am grateful to the Ecuadorian people, President Rafael Correa, and the government. It was not Britain or my home country, Australia, that stood up to protect me from persecution, but a courageous, independent Latin American nation. Assange wrote on WikiLeaks before posting, "Gracias a Ecuador y ustedes." Thanks to Ecuador and to you, on his Twitter. If extradited to Washington, the famous whistleblower would likely face heavy charges. Assange would risk the severest penalties, life imprisonment, or even the death penalty if he were tried in the U.S. Reporters Without Borders' Delphine Helged told IPS. The resources deployed by the U.S. authorities to track down WikiLeaks activists and supporters and obtain their personal data can only reinforce these concerns, she said. But while the announcement of asylum came as good news for Assange and his numerous supporters, it did not change his situation in any way, with the UK police now surrounding the embassy in a menacing show of force, according to WikiLeaks. Should Assange attempt to leave his safe haven, he would be arrested before reaching the airport. We will not allow Mr. Assange safe passage out of the UK, nor is there any legal basis for us to do so, the British Foreign Secretary said in a statement released Thursday. The UK does not accept the principle of diplomatic asylum, the statement read. London had previously threatened to enter the Ecuadorian embassy to arrest Assange. However, such a move would blatantly infringe on the inviolability of diplomatic premises as defined under the Vienna Convention, according to Michael Ratner, a legal advisor to WikiLeaks. The fact that the British, and I was as shocked as anybody, said yesterday that they might invade the embassy to get their hands on Julian Assange is an incredible violation of international law that is unheard of, he told Democracy Now! I mean, I think about the Chinese going into the U.S. embassy to get Chen out of China. This is unheard of in law. It's unheard of in diplomacy, and it's an outrageous and egregious undermining of the right of a country to give asylum, Ratner added. Other legal experts doubt the UK would actually follow through on such threats. The UK mentioned revoking diplomatic status for the embassy. Too legally risky in my view, Carl Gardner, a former lawyer for the British government, told IPS. If he still refuses to surrender, Assange has two options: holding up in his hideout or trying to reach an airport via an embassy vehicle, which would very likely lead to his arrest. I'd be tempted to advise him to go to Sweden and defend himself if there's a trial. I think that's inevitable in the end. I don't think I could offer him any hope of a way out, Gardner told IPS. But Gardner adds wryly that there's yet another possibility. Ecuador could name Assange its representative to the United Nations. That would make him immune from arrest while traveling to UN meetings around the world. Okay, very interesting as to this whole law with regards to diplomatic relations and what comes out of the Vienna Convention. We'll get further into that, but I just wanted to introduce this subject and this whole idea of penalizing a person for blowing the whistle, releasing information, while on a daily basis, as you pick up the newspaper, you will say an unnamed source has told us so and so, this and that, and the rest, and it goes on constantly in the United States. Why? Because they are in support of the desire for leaking the information by the U.S. But when it is against the United States, then they are trying to be accusatory. You remember when George Bush was responsible for downgrading the secret status of Valerie Plame, and the vice president's office conducted the leak, and what has happened out of that? Absolutely nothing. That's part of the hypocrisy that goes on with media and with the United States. Let's go to our caller. Our telephone number here is 524-1080. Aloha, caller. Welcome to the program.
Hello, Polk. I feel somewhat guilty about calling a second time on this.
Don't worry about it.
The issue of Julian Assange is very close to my heart, and I want to make a couple comments about that.
Go ahead. Go right ahead.
I did want to also acknowledge that there is a woman who continues to call into your show who I greatly admire. I don't know her name or her person, but she certainly reflects a genuine commitment to feminist ideology that I fully support. She talks about issues of violence within families that is directed to women, so I want to extend an aloha to her for her important contributions. In terms of Julian Assange, people may have a memory of Daniel Ellsberg, the person who was a whistleblower of the Pentagon Papers. The Pentagon Papers helped the citizenry of the United States to understand the far-reaching violations of militarism by the United States during the Vietnam era. That included unlawful intervention in Cambodia and Laos, the unlawful use of Agent Orange to defoliage the jungle growth in Vietnam, causing countless numbers of cancer victims in Vietnam. I have accessed 14,000 pages of WikiLeaks initial publication of classified information. The most important and predominant information I accessed had to do with a attack on perceived terrorists by a helicopter that ended up shooting and killing 3 Reuters journalists who were perceived to be carrying weapons, which were found not to be true.
They were the cameras, I believe it was.
Say it again.
I thought it was the cameras that was mistaken as weapons, and they say, oh, look, they have weapons, and so they went ahead and shot them, and then later on they found that they were merely cameras by these reporters.
Yes, that is my understanding of observing the video footage of those of that shooting, and there was this psychologically disconcerting laughter by individuals who were expressing the orders to shoot these individuals. I guess I stand on the side of individuals who believe that Julian Assange and Bradley Manning represent the height of courage when it comes to risking their livelihoods and their lives to provide information to the general citizenry about the horrific violations of basic international law. And certainly the individuals in the helicopters that directed the murder of these individuals from Reuters journalistic endeavors is an example of that. My concern is that the materialism and deep culture values of capitalism and militarism contributes to a denial of the basic ways in which misery is imposed on so many people by our government and our military in particular. I remain hopeful that there are a core of individuals who are able to see through the various forms of injustice and violence that is perpetuated by our government. I strongly agree with Dr. Martin Luther King that there is no government in the history of humankind that is the purveyor of violence as the United States. We far exceed the genocidal practices against Native American Indians and Africans coming here from the African continent than the Jews who were horrifically killed by the Nazis. And I'm hopeful that the consciousness of our citizens in Hawaii and the continental United States will continue to move towards action to deal with this. Julian Assange, from my perspective, is a hero, is a courageous individual, and many of us should follow in his footsteps and take the risk that he takes. And I don't want to elaborate further, but those are my comments and reactions.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And call back anytime. We're going to take a very short break.
Kaulana na pua o Hawaii Kupa ama hope o ka aina Iki mai ka elele o ka loko ino Pala pala anunu me ka paka Pane mai Hawaii moku o ke ave Koku ana honoa o Pilani Ka ko'o mai kaua I o mano Pa'aku me ke one o ka kuhi hewa Aolea e kau I ka pulima Maluna o ka pepa o ka enemi Po o hui ai nā ku ai hewa I ka pono sivila a o ke kanaka Aole makoa e mina mina I ka pu'u